When John White stepped inside the abandoned settlement, no one was waiting for him. No guards, no children, no smoke rising above the wooden walls. The colony he had left behind 3 years earlier was gone. And on a post inside the fort, someone had carved a single word: Croatoan. Before White had sailed back to England, the colonists had made an agreement. If they were forced to leave in danger, they would carve a cross above their message. But there was no cross, only a destination, and the silence of everyone he loved. Tonight, we open the file of Roanoke and follow the message they left behind. You've just opened a file that should have stayed closed. The story of Roanoke did not begin with a disappearance. It began with a plan that had already started to fail. In 1587, more than 100 English settlers crossed the Atlantic, hoping to build a permanent colony in the New World. But Roanoke Island was never meant to be their final destination. Their intended home was farther north, in the Chesapeake Bay region. Roanoke was supposed to be a stop along the way. Instead, the colonists were put ashore on an island that already carried the memory of an earlier failure. From the moment they arrived, something was wrong. 2 years earlier, another English colony had been planted there and abandoned. That earlier venture had left behind more than empty buildings. It had damaged relations with the local indigenous communities, especially after violence carried out by the English. So when the new settlers stepped onto Roanoke, they were not arriving in a place of safety. The group included families, craftsmen, and children. Among them was John White, the colony's governor. They had not come to explore for a few weeks and return home. They had come to stay. And within months, White would be forced to leave them behind. By late summer, the colony was already running short of supplies. John White was asked to sail back to England and return with food, tools, and reinforcements. It was not meant to be a final goodbye. White believed he would be gone for only a few months, but his daughter Eleanor remained on Roanoke. So did her newborn child, Virginia Dare. Virginia Dare had been born just days earlier. She was the first English child known to have been born in the colony. For White, Roanoke was no longer only a settlement on a distant coast. His family was there. And when he stepped onto the ship, he left his daughter and granddaughter behind. Before he left, White gave the colonists one clear instruction. If they moved to another location, they had to leave the name of that place behind. They could carve it into a tree or into one of the wooden posts around the settlement. But if they were forced to leave because they were in danger, they had to carve a cross above the message. It was a simple plan. A name would tell him where to look. A cross would tell him they had fled under threat. 3 years later, White would return to Roanoke and find the message exactly where they had promised. But above it, there was no cross. John White reached England expecting a delay. A difficult journey, a few months of waiting. Then he would return with food, tools, and fresh supplies. But while Roanoke waited across the Atlantic, England was preparing for war. In 1588, Spain sent the Armada toward England. The country needed ships, crews, and supplies for its own survival. The vessels White hoped to use were no longer available for a small colony on the edge of an unknown continent. Roanoke had become a distant problem at the worst possible moment. For White, the delay became something far worse than an inconvenience. Every season that passed made the colony more vulnerable. There were children on Roanoke. There were families who had expected help before winter returned. And there was no way for White to know whether they were still alive. Months became years. Then, in 1590, White finally found passage back across the Atlantic. It was not a dedicated rescue mission. The ship was heading west to hunt Spanish vessels, and Roanoke was only one stop along the way. By the time White saw the Outer Banks again, his granddaughter Virginia Dare had turned 3. As White's ships reached the Outer Banks, they saw something through the trees. Smoke. It rose from Roanoke Island, close to the place where the colony had been left behind. For the first time in 3 years, White had reason to believe that someone was still waiting for him. But when his men went ashore, the smoke led them nowhere. The journey to the island nearly ended before the search had even begun. A violent sea broke over one of the boats as it crossed the shallow waters near the shore. The boat overturned. 7 men drowned in the surf. The survivors were shaken, exhausted, and suddenly afraid to continue. Still, White refused to turn back. That night, his remaining men moved closer to the settlement. They sounded a trumpet. They called out into the dark. They even sang familiar English songs across the water. No one answered. By morning, White finally reached the settlement. The wooden walls were still standing, but the houses inside had been taken down. Near the entrance, he found the letters Croatoan carved into a post. Another tree carried the shorter mark, CRO. There was no cross above either message. To White, that meant the colonists had not fled in panic. They had gone somewhere else, and he believed he knew exactly where. To John White, the word on the post did not look like a riddle. Croatoan was both the name of a people and the island where they lived, south of Roanoke. Monteo, a Croatoan man who had traveled with the English, came from there. White had every reason to think the colonists had chosen that place. The message was not an ending. It was a direction. The signs at Roanoke appeared to support that belief. The settlement had not been burned. The houses had been dismantled. Heavy objects had been left behind. And there was no cross above the message. That did not prove the colonists were safe, but it convinced White that Croatoan was where the search had to continue. The next morning, White and the captains agreed to sail for Croatoan. The wind was finally in their favor. After 3 years of waiting, the island seemed close enough to reach. They even left fresh water on shore for their return. For a few hours, it looked as though the mystery might finally end. Then the weather changed again. By evening, the sea had turned violent. The wind grew stronger. The crew struggled to get back aboard before the storm closed around them. White later described waves rising so high that they feared their anchors would not hold until morning. The search for Croatoan was already slipping away. The following morning, they tried once more. As the crew pulled in the cable, one anchor struck the ship and broke apart. Another anchor was lost soon after. They now had only one anchor and one cable left. Their food was running low. Their fresh water was gone, and the weather was getting worse. The the decision was made to sail south for fresh water. Croatoan was left behind. White never reached the island where he believed his family might be waiting. He never found Eleanor. He never found Virginia Dare. And he never returned to Roanoke. The one place named in the colonists' final message was never searched by the man who understood what it meant. No one saw the colonists leave Roanoke. No letter explains where they went. No surviving record tells us whether they traveled together or split apart. But the message they left behind gives us a place to begin. Croatoan was the first and most obvious possibility. Croatoan was not an unknown name to the English. Monteo, one of the indigenous men who had traveled with earlier English expeditions, came from there. The Croatoan people had been among the few local communities with whom the English had maintained a relationship. For a starving colony, moving toward people they already knew may have seemed safer than remaining alone on Roanoke. The carved word could have been exactly what it appeared to be, a destination. But one word could not tell White everything. Croatoan may have been the first place the colonists intended to go. It may not have been their final destination. Some researchers believe the group could have divided into smaller parties. One group may have traveled south toward Croatoan. Another may have tried to move inland toward more fertile land and fresh water. There were other possibilities. The colony had spent 3 years cut off from England. Food could have run out. Disease could have spread. A storm, a failed harvest, or conflict with another group could have changed their plans overnight. And even if some colonists reached Croatoan alive, that does not mean all of them did. The idea of a single terrible event is compelling. A massacre, a raid, a sudden attack in the night. But the evidence White found does not clearly support that picture. There were no signs that the settlement had been destroyed. No distress cross had been carved above the message. Whatever happened, it may have happened slowly. That may be the most unsettling possibility. The colonists may not have vanished in one night. They may have moved, adapted, separated, and slowly disappeared into a landscape England barely understood. Their story could have continued for years, just not in records written by the people who came looking for them. And centuries later, the strongest clues may still be waiting beneath the sand. For centuries, the case rested on a word carved in wood. Archaeology offered a different kind of answer: objects buried beneath the sand. At Fort Raleigh, excavations have confirmed the earlier English presence from 1585. But those remains cannot tell us what became of the settlers who vanished 2 years later. On Hatteras Island, the place once called Croatoan, researchers have found European objects from the late 16th century. That matters because it is the destination White believed his colonists had chosen. Yet an object can travel by trade long after its owner has gone. The finds make Hatteras plausible. They do not identify every person who lived there. Another trail leads inland. A hidden patch on John White's map covered a fort-like symbol near the Albemarle Sound, about 50 miles from Roanoke. At sites in Bertie County, excavators found possible Elizabethan pottery and a small lead cloth seal. Some see evidence that part of the colony moved west, but no settlement, graveyard, or building has been conclusively tied to the lost colonists. Then came a newer claim from Hatteras itself. A team working there reported large quantities of hammer scale, tiny waste fragments created by ironworking. They argue it may show English metalworkers lived among the Croatoan after Roanoke was abandoned. It is an intriguing lead. But even that cannot yet prove who made it, how many colonists survived, or where the rest went. That is the problem with every piece of evidence. It tells us something happened. It cannot tell us the whole story. The colonists may have divided. Some may have moved to Croatoan. Others may have gone inland, while sickness, hunger, and conflict changed the fate of those who stayed. Still, the ground has changed the mystery. Roanoke is no longer only a ghost story about people vanishing in a single night. It may be the story of people adapting beyond the reach of English records. The word Croatoan may have been a promise that someone survived. White understood the message. He simply never made it there. After more than 4 centuries, no one can close the case. No final settlement has been found. No single discovery can account for every missing colonist. But the evidence John White found makes one thing difficult to ignore. Roanoke did not look like a place destroyed in a single night. It looked like a place people had chosen to leave. That does not mean they were safe. A planned departure could still have become a disaster. They may have reached Croatoan. They may have divided into smaller groups. They may have faced hunger, sickness, storms, or conflict after they left Roanoke behind. But the word they carved suggests something different from a sudden disappearance. It may have meant, "Look for us there." The English called them lost because English ships never found them. But a missing record is not the same as a vanished life. If some of the colonists reached Croatoan or moved inland, their story may have continued beyond the reach of the people writing England's history. Not as a colony, not under the name Roanoke, but as survivors in a world England barely understood. Other explanations remain possible. Some may have gone inland. Some may have died before reaching Croatoan. Later accounts point in different directions, and archaeology has raised new questions without giving a final answer. That is why Roanoke still endures. Not because there are no clues, but because every clue ends just before certainty begins. John White returned to Roanoke believing his family had left him an answer. Instead, he found a direction he could not follow. Croatoan, one word carved into wood. A message that may have meant hope, a message that may have been the last trace of the people he loved. The archive lists them as lost, but perhaps they were never truly lost at all. They were simply never found. What do you believe happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? And so, the file remains open. Another file is waiting to be opened.